Imagine discovering that anger is not a force that ambushes you from the outside, but a lever inside your own mind, and that with one breath and one question, you can make it lose its grip. Before this hour is over, I'll give you a one-breath litmus test that can disarm anger in real time, and I'll unpack a counterintuitive habit borrowed from a Roman emperor that turns daily provocations into training rather than trauma. Keep listening, because the very thing you've been taught to fight, your irritation, can become your teacher if you learn how to read it. What follows is philosophy in the practical sense, an examination of how to live with a clear head and an unshaken heart when other people behave badly and the world misbehaves with them. This is education, not therapy or personal instruction. For private decisions or persistent distress, speak with someone qualified to know your life up close. Here we are building a way of seeing, and from that way of seeing, a way of choosing. If we do it well, anger will stop dragging you across the room like a hooked fish. It will still knock, but you won't have to open the door. There is a misconception, repeated so often it feels like common sense, that Stoicism is about suppressing emotions and pretending not to care. That caricature is brittle and collapses under pressure. It also has nothing to do with the living tradition. The Stoic project is not to erase your inner weather. It is to understand what you control and what you don't. Then focus all your energy on the former and release your fixation on the latter. Control here means something very specific. Not the world, not other people, not your reputation floating in the minds of strangers. Only your judgments, your intentions, your choices. The fulcrum of freedom is inside. You will still feel the first wave, you just will not be commanded by it. If that sounds like resignation, look closer. Saying, "I don't control others," is not defeatism. It is permission to act where action is possible. A builder doesn't command the wind. The builder chooses materials, angles, brace points, and tolerances, so the house stands when the wind does what wind always does. Stoicism is architectural in that way. You can be brilliant and enraged, or you can be useful and calm. The second choice makes stronger buildings. When people strike us with disrespect or chaos, most of us make two mistakes in the space of a heartbeat. First, we assume intent. They meant to wound me. Second, we assign meaning. Their behavior defines me. Both are judgments and both are optional. What you cannot help is the jolt. The body tightens, blood heats, the stage lights come up. But what happens next belongs to your training, and training is learned. This is where our one-breath litmus test enters. When provoked, inhale and ask, "Is this within my power to shape right now?" If the answer is no, if this is someone's mood, a rumor, a past remark, a traffic jam, then exhale and choose the smallest wise response that keeps your character intact. If the answer is yes, ask the second half. What action reflects who I intend to be? Then do that and only that. One breath, two gates. Angry impulses cannot pass through both. Before we test it in the world, we need to sober up about the enemy we are facing. Anger wears a heroic mask. It tells you it is justice on a horse, that it defends dignity and protects the good. Sometimes anger escorts necessary action onto the stage. It bangs the door and wakes you up. But the wise do not let the doorman run the house. A spark can light a signal. It can also burn the roof. The Stoic critique is not never feel. It is do not let the feeling choose your aim, your method, or your timing. That is what turns chaos into clarity. Consider a preventable downfall. Call him Kai. He led a capable product team and was loved for his speed under pressure. Then a launch slipped because of a supplier failure, and the executive above him, already strained by a board meeting, scolded him in front of peers. Kai's anger flared, and the story in his mind wrote itself with the instant confidence of adrenaline, disrespect, scapegoat, betrayal. He answered in a voice louder than the scolding, listing every contribution the team had made while his hands shook. The room went quiet and cold. The next morning, an email required a temporary leave while we regroup. He paced the kitchen, replaying the scene until the replay was the only reality he could feel. The hard part isn't seeing how avoidable this was. The hard part is admitting that someone else's confusion became the pilot of his mind for 15 seconds, and 15 seconds can wreck a season. Kai wasn't weak. He was untrained at the exact spot that mattered. Stoic practice would not have turned him into a doormat. It would have given him a single breath to separate the fact from the flare. Fact. A public critique happened. Flare. The inner narrative that this defined his worth and demanded a public counterattack. With one breath, the two-gate question becomes possible. Within my power, yes, my words, my tone, my timing, wise action, meet in private, clarify causes, own misses, propose a fix, and if disrespected again, draw a boundary without rage. Buildings stand or fall at their joints. His joint failed where training was absent. The good news is that joints can be rebuilt. Why is it so hard not to take it personally? Because we think we are seeing the world as it is rather than seeing our own interpretation of the world layered onto passing events. The ancient Stoics insisted that impressions arrive like messengers who may be wrong. Feeling is not a verdict, it is a signal. You observe it, you test it, and only then do you assent or decline. In more modern language, an emotion is data, not a command. Look how freeing that is. If your heart pounds at a shout in the hallway, your body has labeled something dangerous. Outdated software might mistake noise for threat because the body was built in a world with fewer alarms and more fangs. A moment of attention can save you from obeying a false alarm. Now we confront another myth, that Stoic calm is a face of stone. The opposite is true. The practice requires honest naming. Try this simple move the next time heat rises. Instead of "I am angry," use "anger is present." It is not a magic incantation. It is a reminder that you are larger than your current weather. If you are the sky, a storm passes. If you are the storm, everything is lightning. The phrase creates a small distance, and within that distance, choice fits. Let's weave in a delayed awakening, the kind that hurts before it helps. Mina, a surgical resident, broke down in a supply closet after a consultant humiliated her in front of a patient. She was not thin-skinned. She had survived long nights and harsh mentors. But this time, something snapped. For weeks, she carried the humiliation like a hot stone. Her work remained competent, but her voice shrank and her sleep tore itself into fragments. Then, almost by accident, she stumbled on a journal of a Roman emperor, a man who rose each morning and quietly wrote that he would meet the self-absorbed, the ignorant, the ungrateful, and that none of these encounters could touch what mattered unless he let them. The lines didn't erase her pain, but they suggested something audacious. Prepare your mind before the day begins, and much of the day's sting dissolves upon contact. She started a small ritual in the hospital cafe at dawn. A single line became her shield. I will not trade my equilibrium for someone else's confusion. Weeks later, the consultant barked again, and she felt the old spark lunge for oxygen. But the line surfaced first, and she took one breath through the two gates. Do I control his tone? No. Do I control my response? Yes. She chose a simple, respectful clarification, documented what needed documenting, and carried no coal with her into the next room. That was the day she saw in practice what the book had promised in theory: dignity without theater. At the core of this discipline sit two paired truths, and they look like paradox until you live them. First, much that upsets you today won't matter soon. Anger pretends to be permanent because it catches you close. Stand at a distance in time, and it shrinks. Picture the event as a dot on a long road. Imagine yourself 5 years away, waving kindly at your smaller self. What advice crosses that distance? It rarely is shout louder. It is almost always save your breath. Second, we live in flux. Everything changes shape, including you. If a moment of outrage threatens to colonize your day, remember that it cannot unless you sign the deed. Practically, this means learning the half-life of your frustrations. When something stings, ask, how long will this matter if I do not rehearse it? Refusing to rewatch the scene is not denial. It is refusing to pay rent to a tenant that cannot afford your attention. But the most cunning saboteur is the ego. Anger is often wounded pride wearing a moral cape. You want to be seen as competent, principled, untouchable. Someone's comment or neglect tears that costume, and you react to save the costume. Ask yourself with the bluntness of a mentor who loves you, do I want to be right or do I want to be free? There are times you must stand for a value or else you betray yourself. Do it without venom and watch how much cleaner the action becomes. Freedom is not surrender. Freedom is choosing a response that costs you the least in integrity and buys you the most in peace. An insult slips off the person who refuses to glue it to their identity. You might object, the world is full of injustice. Isn't anger necessary fuel? It can be a spark that points the direction of care. I care about fairness. I care about safety. I care about honesty. Good. Now uncouple the action from the heat. You need a cool head to aim the tool precisely. A physician cannot operate with trembling hands. A builder cannot measure straight while cursing the wind. Transform outrage into resolve and keep the temperature just high enough to stay awake. That is the difference between noise and force. There is also the matter of environment, a detail many overlook while wondering why their practice doesn't deepen. Emotions are contagious, not because you are weak, but because humans synchronize. If your daily diet is outrage, shouted headlines, perpetually offended commentary, friends who rehearse grievances for sport, your nervous system learns to hold anger the way gravity learns to hold apples. You do not need to exile difficult people. Some are your duty of care, but you can prune your inputs. Imagine you are a harbor master. Your job is not to control the sea. Your job is to decide which ships dock. Choose to let in voices that model steadiness. When you cannot find them nearby, borrow them from books, lectures, and conversations where calm is the baseline. This is not a personality transplant. It is a sanitation protocol for the mind. There is a playful tool that hides in plain sight. Lightness. Not mockery, not contempt, those are disguised hostility, but the willingness to see the absurdity of certain human dramas. The person who cuts you off and then slows down as if they own the road. The co-worker who treats a scheduling lapse like an existential crisis. The online stranger who is livid at breakfast because he needs someplace to put his loneliness. If you can meet these with a raised eyebrow and an inner smile, you break the ritual. Anger demands an altar and a congregation. Wit turns off the lights in the cathedral. Before we move forward, let's close the loop on that Roman habit I promised, one that can change the physics of provocation. Each morning, imagine that you will meet the impatient, the thankless, the misinformed, the contrarian, and the dramatic. Do not rehearse your indignation. Rehearse your poise. Picture yourself greeting each with a simple interior line, "Here is another soul wrestling with their fate. Let me not worsen their knot by tangling mine." This is not naivety. It is pre-decision. When you walk into a day with decisions already made about who you intend to be, half the battles never need to be fought. How does this land in daily practice when life is messier than tidy lectures? Think in terms of habit loops. Trigger, routine, reward. The trigger is the spark, a tone, a glance, a delay. The routine is your practiced move. Previously, the routine might have been a sharp text or a sulk. Now the routine becomes the one-breath question, a deliberate pause, a reframe, and a minimal, value-aligned action. The reward shifts too. Before, you got the immediate rush of being right and the long tail of regret. Now, you get the slower, deeper reward of self-respect. This is conditioning at the human scale, where character is just the accumulation of thousands of tiny choices that rhyme. Let me give you a transformation journey that worked, because theory without flesh cannot carry you through a hard week. Raphael drove a city bus. He raised 2 kids, he loved his wife, and he had learned to tighten his jaw as a way of life. Passengers yelled, cars cut him off. Dispatches changed routes with no warning. He carried the static home. Conversations became skirmishes. One night, his daughter said, with the frankness 9-year-olds are born with, "Dad, you're loud even when you're quiet." He sat on the steps and stared at the oil stain in the driveway as if it had answers. The next day, he tried something small. During his 15-minute break, he wrote 3 lines. One thing he didn't control and would stop rehearsing. One thing within reach he would do with dignity. And one tiny kindness he would smuggle into his next hour. He did this every shift for 90 days. The first changes were invisible except to him. He found that his shoulders didn't ride up to his ears by noon. The passengers did not improve. They never would. But the bus became a moving monastery where he could practice steadiness. At home, his daughter started sitting next to him again during cartoons. His wife said, "You sound different." He replied, "I feel usable." That word, usable, belongs in the Stoic vocabulary. The aim is not to be untouchable. The aim is to be ready for use by the purposes you say you serve. Now, a micro summary before we layer in nuance. You do not control other people or the weather of events. You do control your judgments and choices. Anger is a signal, not a command. The one breath, two gate question is your portable compass. Rehearse your poise in the morning so you don't have to invent it in the afternoon. And build a habit loop that rewards dignity over drama. With that scaffold up, we can add some careful detail without cracking the foundation. What about righteous anger at genuine wrongs? Stoicism does not ask you to shrug at harm. It asks you to separate your aim from your agitation. If a colleague steals credit, the aim is to restore truth and protect future work. That might mean a calm note to the right people with evidence attached, or a boundary conversation that names the behavior and outlines consequences. If someone is unsafe, the aim is protection. Your action is to create distance, call support, or call law. The rule holds: act from clarity. Even when the situation warrants heat, choose when to carry the fire and when to carry water. A firefighter does not pour gasoline because he enjoys the noise. And what about when anger seems to keep you awake at the wheel? Many swear that without it, they will tolerate nonsense. Consider an experiment. For 1 week, trade volume for precision. When a boundary is crossed, state the boundary once in simple language and pair it with the next step you control. Do not explain yourself into exhaustion. Do not appeal to empathy that isn't present. Do not ask a storm why it is raining. Your authority comes from acting in alignment with your own rules. After 7 days, compare outcomes and compare your inner wear and tear. You may find that you are using anger as caffeine and that better fuel exists. We should also admit the role of the body. Sleep debt imitates outrage. Hunger paints grievances in neon. Chronic stress tunes the nerves to high gain. Stoicism is not antibody, it is embodied wisdom. You cannot reliably choose calm when you are asking a starving, exhausted machine to write poetry. The basics, rest, movement, unprocessed food, sunlight, are not a wellness trend. They are the floor on which judgment stands without wobbling. Fix the floor and see how many arguments evaporate. Let's return to the litmus test and anchor it with concrete scenes so you can feel its edges. Picture yourself in traffic. Someone cuts in and then brakes. The body surges. The story arrives. Disrespect, hostility, war. Inhale. Ask, do I control their driving? No. Do I control my following distance, my attention, my safety? Yes. Exhale. Increase space. Release the rehearsal. Picture a meeting where you present something you worked on for weeks, and the first comment is dismissive. Inhale. Do I control their taste or their envy? No. Do I control my curiosity? Yes. Exhale. Ask a clarifying question. Help me understand what standard you're using. Picture a family member who knows exactly how to scratch your old scar. Inhale. Do I control their triggers? No. Do I control my exit, my tone, my choice to table the topic? Yes. Exhale. Say, I care about this relationship, which is why I'm going to step away and discuss this when we're both settled. You will not nail it every time. The test is not purity. The test is improvement. 1 fewer explosion a week is not a small thing. It is a new life beginning in increments. We should resolve the promise from the opening, the bold, testable claim that anger can lose its grip with 1 breath if you learn where to put leverage. The leverage point is not the emotion. The leverage point is the judgment that interprets the emotion and decides what it means. With 1 breath, you force that judgment to appear in the daylight rather than sprint in the dark. Once it is visible, you choose whether to feed it or correct it. You might be surprised after even a month of practice how many of your fiercest reactions were to shadows on a wall. There is a final archetype we must befriend if we intend to live this way for decades rather than days. the sailor. A sailor keeps a hand on the tiller, an eye on the sail, and an awareness of the wind that will never ask permission. He thinks in terms of vectors and choices. If the wind turns, I trim. If a squall appears, I reef. If the current pulls, I angle and compensate. He does not complain at the wind for being wind. He respects it, calculates with it, and keeps his purpose in view. This is the Stoic image of competence. You do not force the sea to calm down so you can be calm. You learn to be calm so you can navigate the sea as it is. You may find that as you practice, your relationship to respect transforms. In the early days, you will be tempted to demand it from others so you can feel steady. In the mature version, you give it to yourself by acting in a way you respect, especially when no one is watching. The paradox is delicious. Once you no longer need respect to be calm, the respect of thoughtful people arrives on its own schedule. And when it doesn't, you remain usable. Let's seal this with a small ceremony. Tonight, write a single sentence on a note card and place it where your morning eyes must see it. The sentence can be borrowed from Mina or personalized by you. I will not trade my composure for someone else's confusion. Tomorrow morning, read it out loud, softly. Picture, not rehearse, picture the people you may meet who are rude, hurried, or afraid, and imagine your shoulders staying low, your breath even. Your questions kind and precise. Then carry that card in your pocket. During the day when the spark hits, put your hand on the card, breathe once, and run the 2 gates. That is all. Philosophy is not a library trick. It is a choreography for minutes. If you find yourself slipping, do not dramatize the slip. The old habit will whistle to you for months. Catch it, smile like you recognize an old sales pitch, and return to the practice. A Stoic is not someone who feels nothing. A Stoic is someone who refuses to be owned by whatever they feel. Ownership belongs to the one who chooses. We have traveled far, but the road ahead is gracious. As you experiment with the one breath test, with predecision in the morning and a cleaner diet of inputs, you will notice a quiet shift. People will still raise their voices. Headlines will still dance for your attention. The weather will weather. You will paradoxically become more sensitive to what matters and less reactive to what does not. Your voice will lower because it no longer needs to shout to hear itself. You will notice the unteachable gift of timing, when to speak, when to wait, when to withdraw. And in the rare moments when anger must escort an action to the stage, you will thank it for the alert and then send it back to its seat before it tries to deliver your lines. If you want the next chapter, take this path forward. Build a small morning rehearsal that suits your life so perfectly, it becomes almost invisible. We can explore in another sitting a deeper practice called premeditating difficulties, not to summon misfortune, but to disarm it, along with an evening reflection that turns your day into a teacher rather than a tyrant. Think of it as the continuation of this story, where the sailor learns the wind patterns of his own harbor and the builder refines the tolerances of her next house. For now, carry the note card, breathe at the gates, and let calm be your quiet definition of strength.